Growing up, I never thought about God, and I didn't think that God thought much about me. I learned that He really didn't care much about me because of what happened to my family. On August 9th, 2015, my younger brother Evan committed suicide. He was just 17 and going into his senior year of high school. I loved my brother, and many others did too. He was funny and easygoing. Many people said that he always took the time to listen to them, no matter how silly or small their problems were, and he never made them feel insignificant. Evan was smart. He excelled at school and in his hobbies. He was ranked number 1 in the Northeast in his category for the video game Super Smash Brothers. Something he didn't like to share, but he was quick to show off whenever his older brother had his friends over. Evan was an awesome person with an incredibly bright future. And even though he had gone through seasons of struggling with depression, his death came as a complete shock to everyone. To my mom, my dad, his friends, his therapist, and me. The manner of his death was extremely traumatic for me. And almost immediately I began to suffer from PTSD. I would experience flashback hallucinations frequently, where I would feel and smell things that were not really there. These were often completely out of the blue and severely affected my quality of life. I dropped out of nursing school because I couldn't sit through a class without having a panic attack. I felt weak, I felt like I was crazy, and I felt like my body was betraying me. In an effort to cope with the shock of his death, which left me questioning my basic understanding of reality, the PTSD, and the absolute devastation my family was experiencing, I turned to anything that I could to distract me and numb the pain. Alcohol, drugs, and casual romantic relationships. Even though I had been attending church at the time of his death, I was not yet a believer, and I quickly grew resentful and bitter towards Christians. Because even though they said they cared about me, even though many people were praying for me, after a few weeks, and when I was at my lowest point, I felt like they had all abandoned me. But God didn't. Months later, I had tried everything that my friends on the internet told me would make me happy, and I found that it wasn't working. One day, I was contemplating my own suicide, when completely out of the blue, God reminded me of his son. I knew almost nothing about God. I was angry at him. I didn't understand how he could be real, and in many ways, Jesus still felt like a fantasy story that was too good to be real. I didn't know how God could exist, and there could still be evil in the world. What had I done? What had my brother done wrong to be punished in that way? I still had so many doubts, but I knew one thing. I knew that I needed to be rescued. I couldn't do it on my own anymore. And so I said, God, if you're up there, I need to be saved. I need Jesus. From there, I bought a Bible and I started trying to read it and understand it. And I was still caught up in my coping lifestyle, but slowly God started changing me. But I didn't need a list of moral principles to live by. I didn't need God to make me into a good person. I needed God to save me. And I wasn't sure if he could. One day, a few months later, things were looking up. My life was improving, when suddenly I started experiencing one of my PTSD flashbacks after not having had one in a while. I tried the techniques I had learned in therapy, and although they were helpful, nothing stopped it. But this time I started praying. I said, Jesus, help me. And immediately they stopped. And they have never come back. I've never had another flashback since that day almost a decade ago. That's when I learned about the power of God. Not a distant power, but one that is able to help me. And I already knew that God loved the world, but that's when I learned that God loved me.